Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Today, I am joined by the awesome Brian Taylor. How you doing today, man?
No, doing good. How about you, man?
Dude, I'm doing very well. I'm so excited to have you here.
Yeah,
A little bit about Brian that you guys may not know. He's a huge horror fanatic. He's part of the Fandom at Random podcast. They talk about any and all fandoms from every corner of pop culture, as well as he does a horror version spinoff on YouTube where he interviews other content creators. So obviously those links are down here in the description. So make sure you're following him. Make sure you're subscribing to the podcast and the YouTube channel. So what got you started in doing Fandom at Random? What really got the ball rolling on that?
Yeah, so basically me and my buddy Ed, we go to conventions all the time, PAX, all this good stuff. Every time after, we'd sit down and have conversations about, basically nerdom, fandom. He's really into anime, I'm really into horror, but we also enjoy a whole host of things, hence the name Fandom at Random. And our buddy was like, you guys should start a podcast about this based on the conversations we had, And it was kind of born from there. And then as we got more into it, we've been doing it for almost 3 years now. I wanted to do something horror specific as like a spinoff because, of course, horror is my fandom. And yeah, the rest is history.
That's so awesome, man. And it's awesome when you can find someone else that, even though you guys don't, like I said, he's big in anime, you're big in horror, but those are two genres that are very, very closely related.
Yes.
So for you guys to be able to do that and still be able to have that much fun. So how long have you been doing the spinoff on YouTube for?
That's actually fresh. So yeah, on YouTube, I guess I'd have to say at least 4 or 5 months, maybe at the least. Just kind of started off with simple reviews. Then I started noticing TikTok had a huge horror community that's just amazing. And asking people from there, if they wanted to hop on and do some videos with me. And yeah, so that started not too long ago, and it's been a blast so far.
It's always fun to be able to interact with other content creators, especially creators from the horror genre, to kind of pick their brain and see what horror means to them and how they found out about it. And that's how this whole thing got started, man. So I definitely understand where you're coming from with that. Like, I love being able to talk with people and learn how horror started for them. So segue, we know about the podcast and what you're doing on YouTube, man. And like I said, those links are down here in the description, as well as the social media links for Brian himself. So make sure you're giving him a follow on social media.
Thank you.
But obviously you couldn't be doing any of these things if horror never started for you, man. So I want to go back to the past and talk about how horror started for you, your first horror movie. And Brian, the first horror movie that you watched was
Nightmare on Elm Street 2, when I was like 5 years old. Yeah, man.
What a fun way to start your horror world. Most of the time it's either Nightmare on Elm Street or The Dream Warriors, but to be able to talk about part 2 is something I haven't got to do very often on this podcast. And I've come around to this movie the older I've gotten. So do you remember about how old you were the first time you had seen it?
Yeah, so it's actually funny you say that, because I was, from beginning to end, I'd have to say I was probably 7. But when I first saw clips of the movie, I was about 5. I snuck into the living room when my mom and aunt were watching it, hid behind the couch, and caught a couple scenes, the bus scene for one, and then the scene at the end with the claw coming through the chest. But anyway, so yeah, I was about 7 at least when my uncles, they're only like a few years older than me, they brought me and showed me the whole movie and nearly pissed myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, because Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is extremely dark.
Yes.
This is an extremely dark movie, especially by Freddy Krueger standards. When you look at Freddy as a character, I would say this is probably the 3rd darkest Freddy Krueger we've gotten in the whole world of Freddy Krueger. I would say Wes Craven's New Nightmare and the Nightmare on Elm Street remake may have been a little darker and dirtier, but do you remember which scene it was that affected you the most?
Yeah. No, I completely agree about the darkness. And I think the scene for me, when I first saw it, it was definitely the claw through the chest right at the end of the movie. But as I grew to love this movie, it's absolutely the Grady body scene. The effects, the way it's shot, and it might not hold up today, but I still watch that scene and I love the eyeball down the throat, and that scene just always pops into my head immediately when I talk about this movie. Yeah.
And I agree with you. But I will take that effect over the newer CGI from the remake any day of the week. So
Oh yeah.
I
Yes.
get it. And one thing I love about this movie is this movie has the highest body count of any Nightmare on Elm Street film. So that's
Yes.
another
Yeah.
thing about this film I very much enjoy. That this movie not only does it have effective scenes, but there's a lot to unwrap when it comes to Freddy's Revenge, Nightmare on Elm Street
Yeah.
2. What would you say your favorite scene from the film is?
Honestly, and this is the toughest one for me because, again, like you said, I grew up not liking this movie at all. I thought it was the worst of the franchise. Now it almost ties with the original for my number one, and that's because of how many iconic scenes there are for me. So to pick one, oh man, I think have to be the pool scene. I Jim coming into the real world and all that good stuff. The fire scene and him telling them, "You're all my children now." You are all my children now. There's something about it that creeps me out, and I love it.
I still think that the "You're All My Children Now" is probably one of the most impactful. Like that's one of the most quoted Freddy Krueger lines of all time, and that's my favorite scene too. That's what I was going to get into. When you have Freddy Krueger in a group of, because you never get that. He's always getting people in their dreams, but to have him in the real world in a whole group of people at that poolside of that massacre, such an amazing scene. I love that scene so much.
When he's circling the pool, basically stalking these kids, and no one knows what to make of him, he looks like a lion on the prowl. And in my opinion, the scariest Freddy we ever got was part 2, and that scene right there showcases it. Yeah.
I'll agree with you. I think this is the scariest one because usually, like I said, even in Wes Craven's New Nightmare or the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, while that Freddy was dark and perverted and dirty, he never really had the scare factor like this Freddy does. Like this Freddy wants to really affect you. He wants to scare you. He wants to feed on that fear before he kills you. So, we talked about this before on the podcast, and a question I always ask: would you like to see your first horror movie remade? Now, A Nightmare on Elm Street has had a remake. Would you like to see them maybe have a sequel to A Nightmare on Elm Street, which is kind of your Nightmare on Elm Street 2 Freddy's Revenge, like this type of story done nowadays? Is that something that you would like to see?
Oh man, you know what? I'd have to say no. That's a great question, actually, because as we both know, the sexual overtones of this movie of the day, I don't think can be recreated. And I think that's what made it a really unique movie, and also what added just a lot of things added up to how unique part 2 was to the rest of the franchise. So I don't think they could recreate that magic. So if I had to answer, no, I don't think I would watch it. Don't get me wrong. I would pay release night, but if I had a choice, no, I don't think I'd take a remake.
Right. And I think that, the way the last one did, I think this franchise especially shows that if you don't have Robert Englund, it's not going to work. So it's one of those things where, it's a bummer, but I would love to see the Freddy Krueger continue, but you're not getting. That's one thing about the remake. I won't get too much into it, but you just don't have. I don't think anybody could fill those shoes.
Right? No, I don't think it's possible. Yeah,
it's not something that I agree with. Like it's not. I don't think it'll ever happen unless they cast Devon Sawa. I think he would absolutely kill the role of Freddy Krueger.
Right.
So we know about A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and that was your first horror movie. But now I want to kind of throw a little bit of a curveball here at you, Brian.
Okay.
What's your favorite scary movie? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
Some people laugh, some people don't get it, some people do get it. My favorite horror movie of all time is Pumpkinhead. It is my second horror movie that I've ever seen, and I watched it from beginning to end. And again, it really boils down to the effects, and the story I thought was really different than what we were getting in the 80s. And Pumpkinhead is my personal favorite creature feature, and also best designed for me was Pumpkinhead as a creature. He is terrifying, even to this day.
Oh, he looks great. I've always said that Pumpkinhead looks great. He's fantastic. And that's another movie I think is extremely underrated. I mean, there's so many things about that movie that, like the movie starts essentially with a kid being killed by a dirt bike.
Right. And it's, even though it looks a little dated, it still hits pretty heavily when it happens. And the bond between father and son, rather than the main characters being a bunch of teenagers, the main character is the father and then the son, and the bond between them, and what leads the movie off into what we know happens, and that is definitely part of the drawing for me.
No, and I agree with you. Now that's a movie. My good friend Anna, What a Ghoul Wants. We did a top 10 movies we'd like to see remade, and this was on her list. And
yes,
I agree. I think that if they stayed practical with this could be a movie that could be really, really well done today.
Absolutely. Unlike Nightmare on Elm Street 2, this is one I would absolutely, in the right hands, be all for a remake. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So since A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 was your first horror movie, and obviously, as we all know, it is a part of a franchise, I always ask this question. Is A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 your favorite in the franchise? And if not, which one is your favorite in the Nightmare franchise?
Yeah, that's always a huge. So my favorite franchise of all time is Nightmare on Elm Street. To put that out there, and it bounces between the original and 2. It depends on the week, you ask me, honestly. The original was so new, did things so differently, set up Freddy, and Wes Craven is, unmatched in his movies. But on the other hand, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, when I have a lazy day, a rainy day, and I want to sit down and watch a movie, Nightmare on Elm Street 2 just always pops in my head like I need to watch it again.
Sure.
And, those are obvious answers. If I had to give a less obvious answer, I'd say New Nightmare. Honestly, I like it a lot more than people give it credit for. Yeah.
Wes Craven's New Nightmare is amazing. And it's funny because back then I was so bummed out that movie bombed. But if that movie didn't bomb the way that it did, we probably never would have gotten Scream at all. That franchise probably would not exist because he dipped his toes in the meta water with Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and then he just dove in with Scream. So if that movie would have been super successful, we may have never gotten Scream, butterfly effect. But I'm with you. I think New Nightmare is great. I think it's absolutely a very good movie.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, without it, Scream wouldn't happen. That's another one of my favorites. So I'm very happy for that movie.
Yeah. Well, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, another thing about this movie is we talked earlier about how dark the whole thing is. And as horror fans, we love the kills. So what would you say your favorite kill from Nightmare on Elm Street 2 would be?
Oh, man. Favorite kill from Nightmare on Elm Street 2. So I feel like I should say Grady's death, but I've already said that. And honestly, as I watch it more, I think Coach's, I forget his name's slipping my mind right now, but the Coach's death was by far the funnest for me. It was weird. It was out of left field, but it was trippy, and the scene was set up really good, I thought. And overall, I think that's one of the more memorable kills for sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's the kill that really made people hate on the movie. Like, oh, this is gay. Like, shut up, man.
Right? Like,
gosh,
who gives a shit?
Dude, every single slasher from the 80s has so much tits and ass.
Yeah.
I think it says more about the dude watching the movie that gets offended by a dude's ass than it does about the guys that made the film. Like, if you can't sit through one movie of dude ass, it says more about you. You know what I mean? Like,
you're
I'm
right.
100% straight guy. So, I'm not, that's who I am.
To that fact, overseas, Nightmare on Elm Street 2 did amazing because of that fact, In America, though, God, no. God, no.
Right. Yeah. And that's what sucks, even back then, they were trying to, push. I hate saying push or be woke. Like, I fucking hate that. But they were really trying to bring to mainstream things that a lot of people were struggling with, coming out, and, being who you really are, things that were really hard for, it still is to this day, really hard for people to be. And horror has always had a way of bringing those things head on and tackling social issues head on. That's another thing I love about the genre. So before I let you go, my friend, there's one last question I have for you. While we're on the subject of Nightmare on Elm Street 2, we are going to rank this on a skull count. Now, what we're doing, we're not ranking it on quality, production, score. We're not being critics. What we're doing is judging this movie strictly on how much it affected you on first viewing. So 0 skulls being the worst, not effective. 5 being the best, very effective. what would your ranking of Nightmare on Elm Street 2 be?
I'd have to say, because it was my first horror movie, and not only that, but as I grew older, I loved it more and more and more. I mean, can I do halves like 4.5?
100%.
Okay, because I don't think I can go a 5 for very many movies, but 4.5 is perfect for this one.
Right.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. And I'm in the same boat. When I watched this as a kid, I hated it. Like,
Yeah.
I really hated it. It had nothing to do with the gay overtones. All that went over my fucking head.
Right.
I just didn't think Freddy was too dark for me as a kid, you know? Because the first Freddy Krueger movie I ever watched, the very first Nightmare on Elm Street I ever watched, was Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. So you go from watching Freddy and The Dream Master to watching Freddy and Freddy's Revenge. You're like, what the fuck happened?
Sunglass Freddy, right?
Yes, man. Like, yeah. So it's funny because to this day, Nightmare on Elm Street 4 is still my favorite. I don't think it's the best. But when it comes to personal favorites, that's because I watched it the most as a kid.
Yeah, sometimes it's above Dream Warriors for me, which is like, I know criminal, but I agree. It's one of the better ones for sure.
Yeah. Oh, when it comes to being the best made Nightmare on Elm Street, I'll always say the original. When you take out that dumb ending, that original is the closest thing to a perfect horror movie I think you can possibly have. But when it comes to being a favorite by how much I've watched it and I know it, it's got to be Dream Master. That's what I watched as a kid. So
I completely respect that.
And we are here, guys. We are at the end of the third act. The curtain's going to fall. The credits are going to roll. So before they do, there's some links down here in the description that need some click loving. So make sure you are clicking these links down in the description. Subscribe to the podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you're following Brian on social media so you can stay up to date on everything that he has coming up. Brian, please don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
Everybody
thing,
else,
I appreciate it.
Always. Oh, dude, this was an honor. I can't wait to work with you again, man. We're gonna have to set something up. It's been a blast, and it's always fun to do that. So,
thanks, man.
Until next time, guys, keep talking horror. Stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.